All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to BSides 2022 San Antonio and the first track for track one in the clouds. Welcome to the stage, the owner of Enclave Defense, Garrett Myler.
All right. Thank you. As mentioned, I'm Garrett of Enclave Defense. And first, I'd just like to thank BSides San Antonio for providing this opportunity for us to gather together as INFOSEC professionals to network and learn from each other, and for me to share with you some of my research on ICS ransomware, ransomware specifically targeting industrial control systems, and the lessons that we can learn from Conti chat logs. I have spoken at a conference before, but this is my first B-side, so I won't skip the customary about me slide. I'm from what they call the Oregon Trail generation, but technically that's still a millennial, so I think I'm legally obligated to talk a little bit about myself. Like probably many of you, I got my kind of the foundation of my career is started in the military. I was active duty as an airborne crypto linguist. Specifically in special operations, or a DISO, if I have any former air commandos in the room. That job is kind of the coolest job in the Air Force, possibly on paper. I don't want to sound ungrateful. Working with special operators was incredibly awesome, and I was honored to do training with Army Rangers and Navy SEALs and things like that. But I felt my skills would be more valuable as a cyber warrior. So since 2015, I've been helping the DoD with their cyber warfare mission as what they call a weekend warrior, and as a DoD contractor, doing both offensive and defensive cyber operations, and a little bit of a good variety of things from the strategic to tactical levels of effort. Enclave Defense has been around in some form or another since 2015, but the only revenue we had that year was me selling t-shirts, cyber-themed t-shirts to my fellow cyber students at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi. But since the beginning of this year, I've left DoD contracting to consult in the private sector, specializing in cyber risk assessment and project management in industrial or in critical infrastructure. This is my, in chronological order, where I try to convince you of my credibility as a speaker. I already have you guys here in the room, but it'd be a bit embarrassing if you got up and left. So here's the this slide is the relevant details of my life on a PowerPoint slide, right? So I personally think these things just pretty much demonstrate your ability to study, good reading comprehension and test taking skills. I am not that interested about this portion. I don't care to talk too much about it. If you want, I'm always here to mentor if anyone wants to talk, interested in these certs. I'm an instructor for ISA, but I'm more interested in talking about my family personally. I've got a beautiful wife and 5 hilarious kids and some cool hobbies. So if any of those pique your interest, feel free to talk to me later. All right, so before we get started, I think it's important that we kind of make sure we're all on the same playing field, that we all understand what I mean when I say industrial control systems. ICS networks facilitate the communication required for the control and monitoring of physical processes. So think HVAC, power generation, the refinement of raw materials, the manufacturing of food and products, and much more. As a point of clarification, some ICS OGs commonly use the phrase operational technology, or OT, synonymous with ICS. I personally don't do that. Because OT is typically juxtaposed with IT. And in my experience, calling ICS OT, with technology convergence that has been happening over the years, every ICS network I've seen is a pretty healthy mix of both IP-enabled traditional IT, as the DoD might call it, with legacy OT systems. And unfortunately, oftentimes people who refer to their whole network as OT kind of do that to justify keeping IT guys out from messing their stuff because they think they're incompetent. And the physical processes, there is a legitimate concern when you're dealing with physical processes, but I think it's not a healthy paradigm. And I'm passionate about that topic, but that's not what we're talking about today. Enclave Defense has a YouTube channel where I talk more about that if you're curious. But ICS cybersecurity has kind of been received more focus in the last few years because of its association with critical infrastructure and the increased risk that comes along with, Russia hacking Ukraine's civilian power in the middle of the winter, or more recently, people panicking after an oil pipeline gets hacked and filling up plastic grocery bags full of gas. So yeah, ICS can be fun. So let's talk about ICS ransomware. Dragos, I'm not affiliated with them, but they're a large company that specializes specifically in ICS cybersecurity. In March, they released their annual report, kind of covering the trends and issues that they're seeing amongst their customers. And on the left, there is indicates, they indicate ransomware as being like a leading cause for the increased risk that they're seeing in industrial sectors. And on the left, they is their data on a sector breakdown of ransomware victims that they've seen. And you can see 67% is manufacturing. So, and then separately, they provided 4 key, like high risk common factors that they found and broke it down by sector. And just to help you see there, I thought it was interesting that wind, food and beverage, and rail are the most vulnerable or appear to be the most vulnerable sectors based on their common findings. Yet those 3 combined is almost like a third, like almost 3 times as much ransomware attacks are targeting manufacturing. So I thought that was interesting and kind of the basis for this presentation. It begs the question. Oftentimes we're so focused on looking at vulnerabilities and mitigating our vulnerabilities because that's the one thing companies can kind of do within their control. But when it comes to racking and stacking those mitigations, prioritizing them, it begs the question, what else are ransomware attackers looking at besides vulnerability? What other factors might be weighed even more heavily than vulnerability, at least standalone? So before we kind of get started, I feel intellectual honesty requires me to address some of these analytical caveats. We have to remember that 67% might look like, at first glance, might appear to be a disproportionate amount of targeting towards manufacturing, but that might not necessarily be the case. You have to kind of consider some of these things. This is where I feel is my specialty is catching these analytical caveats. We have to remember that the data set is just Dragos's customers, which is a smaller subset of all sectors, right? They focus on industrial sectors. And so at the top left is Palo Alto Unit 42 recently released a ransomware report covering all sectors. And so you see, while manufacturing looks so outsized when you look at industrial sectors, it's actually 5th in terms of order according to Unit 42's data. So, and then also you have to consider, is Dragos's customers equally distributed across ICS sectors? It's possible that they might have like a niche. They might enjoy like a niche in manufacturing sector. And let's say that 67% statistic takes on new meaning if, let's say, 70% or more of their customers come from manufacturing. Conversely, you could think, well, maybe they're finding it easier to get manufacturing customers because more of them are seeking cybersecurity services after experiencing a breach or a compromise. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation there. You have to consider regional bias. They have global, as far as I know, their customers are global. So does anyone here work in the manufacturing sector? IT? No? Okay. Well, imagine you did here in the US. It'd be good to know if your opinion of your ransomware risk might change if you were told that that, let's say, a huge chunk of Dragos's customers come from the Middle East, right? Especially when you look at Unit 42's numbers, a big, like half of the overall targeting is against U.S. companies. So it actually might be underrepresent your ransomware risk if you're a U.S. manufacturer. And then there's target density. That gets even more complicated. they might have a large sector in terms of like gross output, but how many companies are in that sector? Are you dealing with a few big boys, or is there like a more plentiful more plentiful targets? So anyways, I've kind of opened up an analytical can of worms that I can't definitively solve. My wife, though, regularly reminds me of a mother's intuition. I might be dating myself. This is a young crowd, but she, and even though I'm a logical and analytical nature, it's a phenomenon I totally have to acknowledge. And if there's such a thing as a cybersecurity analyst intuition, my gut tells me that manufacturing as a sector likely is experiencing to some degree disproportionate targeting of ransomware attacks. And the rest of this presentation is kind of maybe support that theory, but I don't have the data to definitively prove it. I'm doing this on my spare time. My client isn't paying me to do this. So, and I don't have that. We can't, because I don't have access to Dragos's information, right? All right. So vulnerability obviously is important, but it doesn't exactly automatically or directly mean you're going to be a victim or directly increase your risk. There's other factors. And this Jason, I think is his first name, Christopher, is Dragos's director of cyber risk. And he's got a funny tweet that I think applies here. He says that of the things that all children need to hear, things like I love you and I forgive you and you can do it. One of those is vulnerability management is just one aspect of cyber risk, which is a complex function, including, I can't read, anyone else can read it from there? Anyways, threats and impacts. That's what impacts and threats. So the function or equation that we often use to depict cyber risk is basically threat actors that utilize various TTPs to exploit vulnerabilities, and that when that threat event is realized, it has adverse impacts, and that is what makes you have cyber risk. But threat can further be broken down into resources. I actually like capabilities. I forgot to change it. Capabilities, which includes resources like funding and personnel and their motivation. And I know this might seem a little elementary, but I think Formula One racing, I don't know if anyone got into the Netflix series, but Formula Racing provides a fun kind of example of this equation. And I know this is a room of Americans, Texans, no less. But my work has me engaging with international clients. So I had to go with reuse this Formula One example instead of NASCAR. So any NASCAR fans, I'm sorry. But so Aston Martin is a Formula One team. And if they're assessing their risk of losing, they are going to look at the other competitors, competing teams as their threats, and they have to look at the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of their own drivers and cars that those teams can exploit, and the consequences of not getting on podium and scoring any points for their team at all. But here's where it kind of gets fun. Okay, Aston Martin would be wise to not only consider the capability of their competitors, but their motivation. Because if you don't know, Aston Martin's like at the bottom of the pack right now in Formula One, and the Red Bull team's at the top. So while arguably Red Bull is the most capable of their threats, it would be wiser for them to focus on the similarly ranked Haas team, because they have their weaknesses and strengths, because they have more of a chance of actually beating them. So that similarly, we have to look at the nuance when we look at what we're going to look at as Conti. I'm sure many of you want me to dig into the Conti chat log, so I'll try to get through this quickly. But it's important that we kind of understand in order to learn from the Conti chat logs. All right, so let's look at the ransomware groups. From the ICS data that Dragos provide, here's the breakdown of the ransomware groups and their share of responsibilities targeting ICS sectors. On the right, we see Unit 42's breakdown of the group's activity in all sectors. But if you notice, I kind of caught Lockbit. I'm like, why is Lockbit so low? Most people aren't counting Lockbit and Lockbit 2.0 separately. So I kind of fixed it. I hacked it a little bit and fixed it there. So it's a more apples to apples comparison. But as far as ICS is concerned, Lockbit and Conti represent the majority of ransomware activity in ICS sectors. So wouldn't it be neat if we could get a peek behind the curtain and learn the motives and the TTPs and being used by one of these prolific ransomware groups? Well, boy, howdy, are we in luck, because in late February, if you don't know, the Conti is a Russian ransomware located or centered group. So in late February, they posted this announcement on their Onion leak site, supporting their support, expressing their support for Russia in their aggression and war against Ukraine. Well, one of their members happens to be, I suspect, there's some debate, but I suspect one of their members, it was one of their members who's a Ukrainian, and they weren't too happy about that announcement. So they took to Twitter. I'm sorry, it's so small, guys. You guys in the back, I'll teach you next time, sit closer up. But he created a Conti Leaks Twitter account for the sole purpose of leaking a treasure trove of, like, I think close to, we'll see in the next slide, I think it's like around 250,000 individual chats that somehow this person had access to. And with a message, again, you can't see it. It says like F the Russian government, like glory to all glory to Ukraine or something like that. So yeah, here's kind of a high level summary of what the chats look like. They're broken up into two different chat services, Jabber and Rocket. As you can tell, Jabber is the much bigger chat. And then there's kind of, they're broken up time-wise. The Jabber chat is broken up into two separate groups. There was some infiltration and issues that they had around between end of 2020 and beginning of 2021. So what's hilarious, though, if those techies probably know, wait, how are we reading their chats? Didn't they use encryption? No, they did not. Almost entirely, I found one single message out of the 108,000 messages in the earlier Jabber group that was encrypted. They used it more frequently in the second group. And 254 members, well, I probably missed a few. There's probably more than that. But with hundreds of members, Conti's not that big. You'll see in the slide, they're like less than 100 people. So they're not practicing as elite ransomware hacker group. They're not practicing very good cyber hygiene. They're not encrypting their messages, and there doesn't appear to like they're kicking off old members, which might have contributed to the leaks. Okay, so I tried to do some analysis on, man, you guys are going to want to move closer if you want to see, if you're interested in the receipts that I have. So I tried to do some analysis on what the difference is between the Rocket Chat and Jabber, and more work is needed there, guys, because no reporting. I haven't seen any reporting trying to really explain. I found like one sentence. I thought I was getting somewhere when I found this example. Actually, a lot of the companies mentioned, the targets mentioned in their chats, there actually isn't very much overlap between Jabber and Rocket. I found one, and it was where the company was mentioned, and then a week later, it was mentioned in Jabber. So I'm like, oh, cool, that says something. Well, I found a counter example. The other example I found was the company was mentioned in Jabber, and then weeks later was mentioned in Rocket Chat. My theory, looking at the information, is that there's a lot more like Mimikatz commands and more credentials. It appears to me there's more. I didn't quantify it, but it appears to me there's more credentials in Rocket. So if I was to guess, I would say that Rocket or the Rocket Chat and the members in there are more focused on the privilege escalation and the initial lateral movement in their target networks. And so, yeah, if you want, you can download the files and help me with this analysis. Part of the reason why I'm not as prepared as I would have liked to be is because I was up till 3 a.m. Thursday night, finding some really cool stuff that I couldn't share in this presentation. I thought I should vet it through the FBI first. So there's still more work to be done. And that's where I'm kind of think it's kind of fun. I'm going to correct the record on a few things. This is some tools they use. They've got PHP framework tools you might recognize. OSINT, they do use, there is indication that they're paying for the premium OSINT tools, and then some exploit tools. I'm not including all of them, but Cobalt Strike and supporting modules are the big ones, and Mimikatz. Signal Hire, if you don't know, I believe the last two, Signal Hire and Crunchbase, are probably being used to get like the personal emails and phone numbers of like executives to kind of put on the heat during negotiation. Zoom info is the one that is most easiest to see in the Jabber chats. They're sharing Zoom info links like crazy, just as a profile to provide a profile of their targets. And then, of course, it's almost embarrassing I didn't include this. For those who know, it's the TrickBot. TrickBot, their call sign for it's a banking Trojan that they use, and then the locker, of course, to encrypt and decrypt their victims' information. Here's the receipts. If you're sitting close enough, you can see it talks about getting the buying Shodan and Signal Hire and Zoom info. For their new OSINT department. So it's kind of a formal operation they got going. In fact, this was not really in detail. I never saw this reported anywhere else. They talk about the teams, but I thought it was interesting to look at how much they're actually paying their guys. You can see the main team is the biggest total, like I said, under 181 at this time. And how much they're getting paid, I broke it out on averages. If you look per person, the OSINT team is actually getting paid the most. More than the reverse engineers. That probably pisses some people in this room off. But it could be because their senior leaders maybe are taking care of some of that OSINT, but it kind of highlights how much value they put into the OSINT legwork of prioritizing their targets. Fun fact, I looked up that $1,800, this is US dollars. I'll talk a little more about linguists. I had Russian linguists confirm that this is not rubles here. 1,800, which that would be really horrible, 1,800 rubles. 1,800 average monthly comes out to about top 15% of wage earners in Russia. There's some complaints amongst Conti team members that they're not getting paid enough, but that's not bad. Here's the receipts. Too small to see unless you're really close, but what's the date on that? I think it's June 2021. So they could be paying their guys more now. Who knows? All right. So targets. I use the word targets intentionally, not victims, because while I can see a bunch of companies, it's not easy to confirm how many of them actually experience. I tried reaching out to a few of them and they wouldn't return my calls. One of them, I think a high executive at one of them probably learned that he shouldn't put his cell phone number in his away message, his out of office message. So yeah, I left a voicemail, didn't hear anything back. But I don't know, I have chutzpah. Some people are really sketchy about that. I just like reference my military background and hope that they don't think I'm nefarious or something. So anyways, multiple people have reported that they are seeking victims that have $100 million annual revenue or more. I kind of think that my respect to Krebs and this great team here that did some good analysis on it. I think it's dangerously misleading. It provides a false sense of security to companies go, oh, we're not even close to 100 million, so we don't have to worry about ransomware. Well, I think part of the reason why some people might have overlooked this is, like I said, as a former linguist, I have some pretty good hookups with some really talented Russian linguists. And I kept on noticing rhubarb come up in places where I don't think they should be talking about rhubarb. And so I had my Russian linguist friends look at it, and that Russian word, while it translates to rhubarb, it's what we would call a loan word. If you say it, if you push the Google Translate, listen to what it says, it sounds like "Revinu." That was my best Russian accent I could, I guess. But those two messages there indicate that they're actually on paper, they're targeting 50 million annual revenue or more. Even more interesting is of all the companies that are listed via Zoom info links, the minimum went all the way down to 1 million annual revenue. The top was 12 billion. The median was less than 75 million. I confirmed 8 companies using their leak site, their Onion leak site. I confirmed 8 companies that were both in their chat logs and did experience, based on that leak site, were victims. And the lowest one had a publicly known annual revenue of 11 million. Okay. So you have 15 million, you think, oh, we're just a real estate office or we're just this or that, that's not high risk. Well, Conti is the most prolific and they're willing to go after 11 million. There's other ransomware groups that will probably go after less. So something important to keep in mind. All right. So Forescout did some great analysis that I didn't want to, reinvent the wheel. They call them victims. I think they're probably just mean targets that were referenced in the chats. But you can see there, the biggest chunk is actually medium, not large companies. And mind you, to consider, Conti is the highest grossing ransomware in 2021, both in number of victims and earnings, what's reported. So yeah, and even small companies have a healthy representation there. Sector breakdown, services were first, then manufacturing, and then retail. Shoot, I have like 10 minutes. Okay, let's look at revenue and ransoms. It's been reported, other people are reporting that their initial ransom demand is based off of a percentage of their annual revenue. But I didn't see anyone reporting the revenue, what that percentage was. So I thought it was useful information for people who are managing their ransoms, trying to quantify. That's a big thing that companies do in risk assessment. They want to quantify the risk. Well, there it is. What's your annual revenue? They're going to initially demand, or at least Conti is going to initially demand around 3%, give or take. But as that top message, if you can see, they say, well, ask for, I think it's 4 million, ask for 4 million, but so that we pick up at least 2. So they understand that they're probably they're willing to negotiate to about half of what their initial demand is. That's actually a little more aggressive than average. According to Unit 42's data, they indicate the average ransom demand is 2.2 million, and the average payout is about a quarter of that. So Conti's a little bit maybe more aggressive. And you see that one time someone offered like 18 Bitcoins and like, they just swore up a storm. They felt so insulted that they went through all that work and they're only offering 18 Bitcoin, which was like, I don't know, 30,000 at that time or something like that. No, maybe 300,000. That's probably low, huh? Anyways. All right. So now we start getting to motivation. I thought it would be interesting to look at, to understand though, I see numbers in the chats, but how do I contextualize it? So analytically. So I thought it'd be interesting to use gross output data to kind of as an indication of the deep pocketed sectors, how much money is flowing through a given sector. And when you look at that, wow, actually it kind of lines up. Manufacturing is first in both, and with transportation, food and beverage kind of neck and neck behind manufacturing. Maybe manufacturing is a little bit disproportionate. So you have to remember that they're not just interested in successfully deploying ransomware on a deep-pocketed victim. They also want to secure the ransom payment, right? So that's another thing in particular. When you're working manufacturing, every hour, every dollar that production is offline, they know how much money they're losing every hour. So there's that additional pressure where they already know how much every hour is worth easily, and that may be maybe on top of, as far as ICS sectors go, on top of the being deep pocketed, that's an additional pressure that may be increasing the disproportionate targeting. Okay, all sectors, it gets a little bit more interesting with Unit 42 data and the Department of Commerce data. Notice that construction is relatively not that deep pocketed compared to other sectors, but it's number 2 as a ransomware target sector. So you have to consider, that's where maybe vulnerability is playing a bigger part. They're as a sector, they're more vulnerable, and maybe they're more willing to do a quick and easy payout to get back to work. Conversely, if we look at state and local government sector, they seem to be kind of under targeted based on, if you alone look at their output by sector. And I think the key to this is 2019. Does anyone remember? Let's try to get some audience. I like participation. Does anyone remember what happened here in Texas in 2019 relevant to ransomware? No? Coordinated ransomware, or REvil ransomware attack targeting, impacting 22 Texas municipalities. I might have recognized that when I said it, but how many of them paid the ransom? 0. Big fat whopping 0 paid the ransom. Well, at least that's what they reported. And then that was in May of 2019. And then in August, another big city got hit, bigger than the little Texas country bumpkin towns. It was Baltimore. Baltimore got hit with Robin Hood ransomware. And I was actually living in the area at the time, and I didn't take public transit, but it really impacted their operations. And their ransom was $76,000, and they refused to pay. The estimated damage and I think went into the millions. And but they took a principled step. It's funny how governments seem a little bit more willing to tolerate the suck on principle. But to their credit, it appears to be working for them as a sector, that ransomware victims kind of have maybe gotten the idea that state and local governments are more likely to follow FBI guidance and refusing to pay a ransom, and it's benefiting the sector. So I'm totally sympathetic. I'm totally sympathetic to the for-profit companies that are in this situation, and they say, well, it's best for our customers, it's best for our stakeholders, our investors, that we just pay the ransom. But maybe there's some innovative solutions that we can think of that would encourage companies to refuse ransoms more. I'm thinking CISA might be able, maybe private sector solutions too, through industry collaboration, ways to incentivize companies to benefit the whole sector. Anyways, just a thought. So motivation, they're financially motivated attackers. That's what I reference that phrase often in my risk assessments. Financially motivated attackers, they're motivated by getting that money. But even then, there's some nuance there. It's not, like I said before, it's not just go chasing after the highest dollars. It's a function. How much might I get based on the revenue, but also how willing are they to pay? Fun fact, since I have time, of the 8 companies that I confirmed, 2 of them were multi-billion-dollar annual revenue. And I'm protecting their identity if you haven't noticed. But one of them refused to pay. I don't know. I reached out. That was one of the companies I reached out to. I wanted to know. And well, I should say, based on the fact that 100% of their data was released on their leak site, I'm assessing that they refused to pay. And I kind of wanted to find out why, with how much I wanted to know, did maybe they reduce it to 2% or, with that high of a ransom. Anyways, so that's my presentation. Thank you again for the BSides for this opportunity. And I'm able to take some questions for the next 5-10 minutes. If anyone has any. Yes. I think we have a microphone here, so everyone might get picked up on the recording as well.
Do you think that companies' willingness to pay and government's lack of willingness to pay is maybe related to insurance that companies may have, that maybe governments don't have a way to purchase or haven't figured out how to purchase?
It could be. I didn't dig that deep into the insurance chats, but it has been reported that they definitely were interested in who had insurance that would just kind of do a more easy insurance payment. So yeah, that's a really good point. I don't have insight. You believe that governments aren't buying cyber insurance? I guess they aren't, right? They're like, who's gonna? I don't know. That's a good point. I'd be interested. Do you have some insight into whether or not they are or not buying insurance, cyber insurance?
I don't, but I know that one of the complications is, of course, like, who are we paying this money to? Who would our insurance pay this money to? A government might be more held easily accountable if they pay money to North Korean hackers, especially when you don't know who you're dealing with. And a company can kind of hide behind lawyers with insurance. I really don't know. That's
some deep insight. No, I really appreciate that. I kind of agree with your initial assessment that the kind of the additional complexities of a government. I mean, I think that probably comes in line more with the federal government than state and local municipalities. But fun fact, that brings up an interesting point, is that there's some reference, I forget if the outlet was named, but there's reference to a journalist that was helping them kind of broker negotiations. I thought that was kind of interesting. If I was a tech journalist, I don't think I would put myself in that position, but they also said they have connections. There are also some indications that they are tied closely to the Russian government. It appeared that they were tasked to look up I'm not Korea, Asia is my kind of area of responsibility when I was a linguist, but to look up, I forget his name, some big target of that Putin enemy that they were responsible for kind of getting information on. So that tie to, like you said, that tie to nefarious governments, that's a good concern definitely to think about when paying a ransom. Any other questions? Yeah.
Great talk. I have a question about one of the insights, which is the medium size companies are actually one of the largest targets. Do you have any thoughts or ideas as to why they would go after those the more after than the big companies? I would expect the big companies to be the majority of the targets.
I would suspect, okay, so one thing I forgot to mention that reminds me in the tool section is that what was conspicuously missing from the tools that they use are initial access tools. So it is, I agree with the assessment that it looks like they're using access brokers. So that could be at play, is that maybe it's, they aren't organically generating their targets, really. They are starting with maybe access brokers. And so maybe there's more medium-sized companies than the larger ones that they're getting initial access to. Maybe the larger ones have the budget to kind of do some of that, take care of the low-hanging fruit type stuff. And so, yeah, I suspect it's a combination of just what they have access to and the number of companies, right? You start to get that density, like I talked about, gets more when you get to medium-sized companies. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wiley.
Do a line next time.
How's it going? Earlier at the beginning, you had a slide that showed Conti, Lockbit, all the different like ransomware groups. Are you able to talk a little bit about like how the attribution is done, how easy or hard it is? It looks like you kind of got lucky getting that dump of Conti on Twitter. Is it usually that easy or is it a lot harder?
Good question. Threat activity attribution is a really sticky monster, as I understand it. You're looking closely at the TTPs, but attribution with ransomware gets pretty easy because of who they're paying for they kind of track, they can see what the wallets are that they want to send Bitcoin to, and the ransom note is usually distinct. They're not usually hiding, and then they've got the leak sites, right? A lot of Unit 42. Oh, sorry, wrong slide. A lot of Unit 42's data. If you see, where was it? Is come on the left there is coming from leak site data. So it's pretty easy to attribute when they say, pay us Conti. So I don't think attribution is too big of a concern here, even if you don't have the insight.
I didn't know if they say like, send money to the Bitcoin address or something.
Yeah. The ransomware would typically give instructions and they'll have contacts. Like I said, they kind of run as somewhat a formal operation. Like, oh, let me pass you to our customer care. Oh, you've been ransomed. Oh, well, thank you for doing business with us. Let's transfer you to our customer service department. They'll handle your payment, right? So fortunately, you can say ransomware isn't as difficult as other type of exploitation activity. Maybe one or two more questions.
Thank you.
One more question. Yeah, that was a good question though. I think no more questions. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
All righty. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back at 11 o'clock with the next speaker.